On the morning of December 9th, 2024, a duck hunter alone in the flooded Arkansas timber blew a call into the dark, and the dark called back to him in his own voice. The recording's 47 minutes long. It was pulled 11 days later from a chest-mounted action camera wedged upright in the fork of a cypress knee, deep in the Cache River bottoms, the lens pointing back the way the hunter had come, the device still set to record. The audio on that card is the reason a forensic specialist in the Mid-South now keeps a single, underlined sentence at the front of her file. Do not attempt to reproduce the conditions under which this recording was made, because the voice in the timber was not another hunter. It was not playback. It carried no human vocal cord signature at all, and it spoke words the hunter had never said out loud. The hunter's name was Garrett McCall. He never came out of the timber. Garrett McCall was not the kind of man who got lost in the timber. 41 years old, raised in Stuttgart, Arkansas, the self-proclaimed duck capital of the world. He had been hunting the flooded bottoms of the White and Cache River system since he was old enough to carry a single-shot 20 gauge. He guided part-time during the season and ran a small YouTube channel where he posted his hunts. Quiet, unhurried videos of green timber mornings, maybe 200 subscribers, most of them local. The chest-mounted action camera he wore was as much a part of his rig as his waders and his call lanyard. The footage from December 9th begins the way most of his videos begin. In total darkness, the lens picking up almost nothing but the wet glint of headlamp light on black water. Garrett's voice comes through low and even, the practiced murmur of a man who has narrated 100 of these to an audience that mostly isn't there. December 9th, 25 till legal. Water's high in the green timber, maybe knee to thigh on the rises, chest deep in the sloughs. Wind's dead. Should be a good morning. He had parked at a gravel pull-off on the edge of a state wildlife management area and waded in alone, something he had done 1,000 times. His regular hunting partner had begged off the night before with a sick kid. Garrett, the footage makes clear, was not bothered by going solo. He knew this stretch of timber the way other men know their own backyard, which oaks held water, which ridges came up dry, where the wood ducks roosted, and where the mallards dropped in once the sun cracked the canopy. The first 11 minutes of audio are unremarkable and, to anyone who hunts, almost soothing. The slosh of his legs through the flooded timber, the creak of his waders, the soft electronic chirp as he checks his phone for legal shooting time. He stops at the base of a massive water oak, its trunk half submerged, and sets his back against it. A natural blind breaking up his outline against the bark. He pushes a handful of decoys out into the open hole in front of him and lets them settle. Then at 12 minutes in, with the sky still fully dark and not a single bird moving, Garrett raises his call to his lips and blows the first notes of the morning. A standard hail call, a loud descending sequence meant to carry across the timber and pull in passing ducks. The sound rings out across the flooded bottom and fades into the trees. He waits, and in the silence that follows, something answers. The response comes from somewhere off to Garrett's left, deeper in the timber, maybe 80 or 100 yards out. It is, unmistakably, a duck call. The same descending hail he had just blown, almost note for note. On the footage, Garrett goes still, then a low chuckle. "Somebody else out here," he says under his breath, not alarmed, mildly annoyed. Public land duck hunting is competitive, and another hunter setting up that close to him in the dark, without a word, was bad manners but not unusual. So Garrett does what hunters do. He calls again, a shorter, friendlier sequence, the kind you use to acknowledge another caller and stake out your spot. And the answer comes back again from the same direction, but this time, listening to the recording, something is slightly off. The call that answers is too perfect. It matches not just the rhythm of Garrett's call, but its exact tonal flaws. The tiny break in the second note that comes from his particular reed, the way his hail trails into a rasp at the end. It is less like another hunter answering and more like a recording of Garrett's own call played back to him from the trees. On the footage, Garrett doesn't seem to catch it yet. He mutters, all right, and shifts against the oak, settling in to wait for legal light. For several minutes, there is nothing but the drip of water from the canopy. Then the call comes again, but Garrett hasn't blown his. It comes unprompted from the dark timber, and the same flawless imitation of his hail, and now it is closer, maybe 60 yards. "That you, Travis?" Garrett says, naming his usual partner, the one who'd stayed home. There is no reason Travis would be there. The question seems to come out of him reflexively, the way you call out in a house you thought was empty. Nothing answers in words. Instead, after a pause, the duck call sounds again, and folded into the middle of it, almost buried in the reedy notes, is a sound that is not a duck and is not a call. It is a human voice, low and wet, shaping itself around the same descending pattern, trying to talk through a duck call, trying and almost succeeding. Garrett goes quiet. On the footage, you can hear his breathing change, shorter, higher. He clicks off his headlamp. For 90 seconds, there is only the sound of the water and his own controlled exhale through his nose. Then, very softly, almost to himself or to the camera he knows is recording, he says, "There's no ducks moving, nothing's flying, so what's calling?" What the recovered audio captured over the next several minutes is the reason this case ever reached a forensic lab. By the timestamp on the footage, it's now 20 past 6 in the morning, fully within the window before legal light. The timber still dark enough that the camera shows almost nothing but vague gray shapes where the trunks stand in the water. Garrett has not moved from his oak. He has stopped calling entirely. And the timber has not stopped answering. The thing in the dark has abandoned the duck call now. What comes through the recording instead is a voice, clear, close, and conversational. It calls Garrett's name, not a guess, not a shout into the dark, but his name spoken plainly, the way a friend says it when they walk up behind you. "Garrett." A pause. "Garrett, over here." On the footage, Garrett does not answer. His breathing is rapid now. The camera dips and rises with his chest. The voice continues. And as it does, the audio analysts who later examined the file noted the first of the recording's genuinely inexplicable features. The voice was not coming from one fixed point. It moved. Between sentences, it shifted from Garrett's left to a position almost directly behind his oak, then out to his right, crossing distances of 60 and 70 yards in the gaps between words, far faster than anything could have waded through chest-deep timber water, which Garrett himself could be heard doing only minutes earlier, slow and loud and labored. And the voice was friendly. That was the part that the lab personnel said unsettled them most when they listened. It was warm. It was patient. "Come on out here," it said. "I got birds working over here, whole flight of them. You're going to miss them sitting back there." It was the exact thing one duck hunter says to another. It used the cadence of camaraderie, of a buddy waving you over to a hot hole. And underneath the warmth, on the spectral analysis performed weeks later, the voice carried no human vocal cord signature at all. Then it changed. Mid-sentence, the friendly voice dropped its own pitch and texture and became, with no transition, Garrett's voice, not an impression of it. His. The same voice the camera had been recording for 20 minutes. It spoke the exact words Garrett had said into the dark earlier, December 9th, 25 till legal, and Garrett's own intonation, then laughed his low chuckle, then blew, through no instrument at all, the precise hail call he had made when he first sat down. The timber was playing Garrett back to himself. On the footage, Garrett whispers a single word. It is not a name, and it is not a curse. It is okay, the small, flat okay of a man who has just decided he's leaving. He begins gathering his line, pulling the decoys back toward him through the water, his movements quick and clumsy. And the voice, his own voice, says calmly from very close now, "Don't go. You just got here." So if you were alone in the dark timber and something started calling you with your own voice, repeating words you said 20 minutes earlier, would you wade out toward it to see what it was? Or get back to your truck as fast as the water would let you? Comment your answer below. Now here's what happened in the final 8 minutes of Garrett's recording and what the forensic audio team found buried inside it. The decision Garrett made next is the one the investigators kept returning to because nothing in the footage explains it. For nearly half an hour, Garrett had done everything right. He had stayed put. He had stopped calling. He had started packing to leave. And then, at 6:41 in the morning, with his decoys gathered and his back to his truck, he turned around and began wading deeper into the timber toward the voice. The footage offers no clear reason. Some who have listened argue that the voice, in its final form, said something just at the edge of audibility that changed his mind. There is a passage roughly 4 seconds long that the lab could never fully resolve, a low-layered murmur that sits beneath Garrett's own breathing. Others believe he simply convinced himself, against everything his senses were telling him, that there really was another hunter out there in trouble, and that walking away from a man in chest-deep water in the dark was something he could not do. Whatever the reason, the camera shows him moving away from safety, his headlamp still off, feeling his way from trunk to trunk through water that rose from his thighs to his waist to his chest. As he wades, the voice guides him. It is gentle. Little more. You're close, right up here, past the big cypress. It uses landmarks. The big cypress, the slough, the flooded slough that anyone who knew this timber would recognize, which meant the thing speaking knew the timber too, or it pulled the knowledge of it out of Garrett the way it had pulled out his voice. The audio captures Garrett breathing hard, the water sloshing high around his chest, the occasional grunt as his boots find and lose the soft bottom. He says twice, "Travis," still reaching even now for an ordinary explanation. The voice does not pretend to be Travis. It only says, "Almost there." At 6:49, the water reaches the camera. The microphone distorts as it dips below the surface, then clears as Garrett rises onto what must be a submerged rise or root mass. For one moment, the lens, pointed up at last, catches the very first gray of dawn bleeding through the canopy. Bare oak branches against a paling sky, the most ordinary and beautiful thing a duck hunter sees 1,000 times a season. And in that gray light directly ahead of Garrett, the footage shows a shape standing in the water among the trunks. It is the right size and the right outline to be a man in waders. It does not move. It does not have a headlamp. The image is too dim and the frame too brief for anyone to say what it was. Garrett's voice comes through one last time, very quietly, very close to the camera mic, and it is no longer afraid. It is something worse. It is relieved. "Oh," he says, the way you say it when you finally recognize a face. "Oh, it's you." The recording ends 3 seconds later, not in violence, not in a scream. The audio simply stops mid-breath as cleanly as if the camera had been switched off. Though when the device was recovered, its switch was still set to record and its battery still held a charge. Garrett McCall's truck was found at the gravel pull-off 2 days later when he failed to return calls and Travis drove out to check. The search that followed covered the flooded timber for over a week. Dog teams, drones with thermal cameras, divers working the deeper sloughs. They found his sled of decoys floating tangled in a buttonbush thicket roughly 400 yards from his truck, far deeper into the timber than his setup spot. They found his shotgun, unfired, hung in the crook of a low oak limb above the waterline as if it had been carefully placed there. They did not find Garrett. They found the chest camera 11 days into the search, wedged upright in the fork of a cypress knee, its lens pointing back the way he had come, still recording nothing but black water. The footage was turned over, first to the county sheriff's office, and then, because of what was on it, to a private forensic audio specialist who consults for law enforcement across the Mid-South. Her report runs 19 pages. The conclusions in it are careful, technical, and deeply uncomfortable. The duck call responses, she determined, were not produced by any reed instrument. A real call has an acoustic signature created by air passing over a vibrating reed inside a barrel. The answers in the timber had the frequency profile of a call, but none of the turbulence, none of the breath. They had been generated, she wrote, that by a source replicating the output waveform of Mr. McCall's call, without replicating the physical mechanism that produces it. In plain terms, something was making the sound of his duck call without using a duck call, or a duck, or lungs. The voice was worse. When she isolated the passages where the timber spoke in Garrett's voice and compared them against the 20 minutes of his genuine narration from earlier in the same recording, the match was not an imitation, it was identical, a perfect reproduction of his vocal signature, including micro-tremors and breath patterns unique to him, but it carried no evidence of a human vocal tract producing it. The report's central finding reads, "The questioned vocalizations reproduce the subject's voice with a fidelity exceeding what impersonation or recording playback can achieve, while lacking the biological acoustic markers that human speech requires. The source reproduced sounds the subject had made earlier in the same session, including speech the subject did not repeat aloud. That last clause is the one that has kept the file open, because among the words the timber spoke back in Garrett's voice were phrases Garrett had thought or written but never said into the camera at all. A private line he used to sign off his videos, one he typed in the captions but had not spoken that morning. The thing in the timber had not merely copied the sounds he made, it had copied the words he kept inside. The final page of the report carries a single underlined sentence, the only place in 19 clinical pages where the specialist allowed herself something close to a warning. I am unable to identify the source of these vocalizations, and I would advise against attempts to reproduce the conditions under which they were recorded. The flooded timber of the Arkansas big woods is still hunted every December by men and women who wade alone into the dark before legal light and blow their calls into the trees and wait for an answer. Most mornings, the only thing that answers is a real duck, or another hunter, or nothing at all. Garrett McCall's chest camera recorded the morning. It was something else, something that learned his call, then his voice, and then the words he had never spoken, and used all three to walk him quietly out into water where no one would ever find him. The footage has been examined by acoustic specialists and by people who hunt that timber their whole lives. None of them can explain the voice, and none of them anymore will hunt that stretch alone. Subscribe for more documented wilderness mysteries. Next, another outdoorsman's encounter with something that shouldn't exist.